When Marty talks about uh, bringing home to ordinary people that it's costly to have a carbon tax, or for that matter, a tradable permit system, what that really means is the relative price of carbon-intensive goods and services will rise relative to the others.
But that's the purpose.
No, that's the name of the game, actually.
And
But
there have been calculations.
yeah, but Nick, you wanted to get back at.
No, actually, a lot of what Marty and Tom said, I agree with, and so part of my reaction was them thinking that they were disagreeing, which I think they're thinking they're disagreeing is a mistake, which I try to explain. But also, I think an understanding of where the politics is very important, and I don't think it's quite in the same place as was just described, either in the United States or elsewhere. But Marty said we've got to level with people about the costs, and we've got to be clear about the level of the costs. There's a double meaning of the level. What does it mean to leveling with people? Well, you do your best to calculate the cost, to calculate the kind of carbon prices that might be implied in these different kind of policies, look at the overall cost. It's not just the marginal, it's not just the carbon price, it's the integral along the cost curve that gives you the cost. And what do? What do you get when you look at that? Well, let me just give you some mental arithmetic. We have to take out, for the path that I've described, which as I said, is much less radical than many environmentalists, but more radical than some economists. We have to take out, if we had a cut by 50% by 2050 relative to business as usual problems with defining business as usual, but put that to one side, we'd have to take out about 50 gigatons per annum. That would probably cost in the region of, and we need more work, but would probably cost in the region of an average cost of about $40 a tonne of CO2. A substantial amount of that negative, a substantial amount close to zero, and a substantial amount well above $40 a tonne. So $40 a tonne times 50 gigatons is $2,000 billion, $2 trillion, and world GDP in 2050, who knows, but if we're sensible, might be twice what we are now. If it's more than twice, splendid, but for the sake of this argument, doubling world GDP would take us from sort of order of magnitude $50 trillion to 100, and 2 and 100 is 2%. So that's a back-of-the-envelope version of much more detailed cost calculations that you could make based in terms of integrals along cost curves to get to average costs. Now, so 2% of GDP, my guess is it's an upper estimate. The International Energy Agency have come in with lower numbers than that. McKinsey's come in with much lower numbers than that. IPCC considerably lower than numbers than that. I like to make an allowance, because I've seen it in action, for bad policy. Bad policy can push the costs up, and so I always make an allowance for bad policy. But many people are trying to level on what those costs would be. It might well involve, in the near term, a carbon tax or a trading price, whichever, of around $50 a tonne of CO2, and that would be equivalent to roughly $25 on a barrel of oil. These are significant costs, and we can and should, and many of us, I hope, do level with people about how big they are, and then go deeper into them, Bob, and you can look at the relative prices, and the price of steel or aluminium could be going up by 6 or 7%, and the price of many services would not go up by anywhere near 2%, and that's the kind of changes in relative prices that you're talking about. Significant, but not sort of way out along, they're not 100% or anything like that. Relative price changes, at least at broad levels of aggregation. So that's about levelling with people and levelling about the costs. So levelling with people and then what are the level of costs. So I don't think that it's correct to try to fool people, but what I reacted against is the suggestion that that's what you try to do. Having said that, I do think that if you ask somebody on the Clapham omnibus in London, is there a carbon tax, they would say no. When in fact we've got quite heavy taxation of petrol, and the European Union emissions trading scheme at about €20 a tonne now of CO2, maybe what, $25, $30 a tonne of CO2, covers well over 40% of EU emissions. So I take Marty's point that they know more about the tax on petrol than they do about the European Union emissions trading scheme. So there is a question of openness, and I would, with Marty, go down that path, and I think that would involve explaining to people more about the trading scheme that we have and what kind of price is embodied.